Nietzsche gazed upon love with a brutality few dared to match. For him, there existed no purity, no romantic ideal, no soulmate waiting for another. Love was, above all else, a disguised instinct for power, a sophisticated form of illusion. When we love, we believe we're seeking the happiness of another, yet beneath the surface, we're merely feeding our own desires, needs, and impulses for dominance. This notion shatters the romantic image we've carried since childhood, but it also opens a liberating space. What if love wasn't about the other person, but always about ourselves? What if humanity's most exalted feeling was, in reality, the most selfish? By accepting this vision, we stop deceiving ourselves and can perceive the game of forces that truly unfolds in every relationship. The question Nietzsche hurls at us is brutal. Do you love the person, or merely your own reflection in them? If this kind of reflection strikes you deeply, subscribe and join us on this journey to the darkest and most transformative core of human love. When Nietzsche spoke about love, he stripped it of all romanticism and exposed it as what reveals us most, an instinct of appropriation disguised as giving. We love, we believe we're caring for another, offering affection, dedication, even sacrifice. Yet deep down, every gesture of love conceals a hidden quest, a selfish necessity. It's as if love were a coin we give, believing we're paying the other, when in truth we keep it only to feel richer ourselves. What Nietzsche saw with such clarity was how love, this feeling exalted as pure, is nothing more than one of the most ingenious strategies of human instinct to assert itself over the world. Notice the details. When someone says, "I love you," what does this mean? Is it a promise of unconditional surrender? Perhaps. But it's also a way of saying, "I want you. I want your attention. I want your presence. I want you to be mine, to fit into the role I imagine for myself." Love, in demanding exclusivity, already reveals its selfish face. We cannot accept loving and seeing the other free to be loved by someone else. We want to be unique, irreplaceable. And isn't this desire to be the center of another person's universe the most refined form of selfishness? Nietzsche perceived in this the cruelty hidden beneath the mask of sweetness. Jealousy, for instance, isn't merely fear of losing the other, but fear of losing the mirror in which we contemplate ourselves. The beloved becomes an extension of our own worth, a reflection that confirms we exist, that we are desired, that we matter. Thus, when we say we love, we're often merely saying, "I cannot bear to lose what reinforces my own image." This perspective may seem dark, even uncomfortable. After all, who likes to believe their declarations of love are merely variations of a desire for possession? But if we look carefully at daily life, we perceive how true this is. Think of couples who, after years together, consume themselves in arguments over trivial matters. Behind each discussion lies not just the difficulty of coexistence, but each person's insistence on imposing their way of seeing, their form of organizing life, their dominion over shared space. Even in the most tender care exists this spark of appropriation. Nietzsche isn't denying the existence of affection, the pleasure of being together, shared joy. But he's showing that all this mingles with a vital need for self-affirmation. When I love, I'm not merely contemplating the other, but projecting myself onto them. It's as if the beloved person were a field where I plant the seeds of my desire for eternity. I want them to look at me, desire me, choose me, because thus I have confirmation that my life matters. Love, therefore, is less about us and more about I. The cruelty of this analysis is that it dismantles the most comfortable narrative we have about ourselves. We like to think we're generous, that we love without expecting anything in return, that the other's happiness suffices. But Nietzsche invites us to look within and perceive the opposite. We give because we want to receive. We care because we want to be necessary. We love because we cannot bear the idea of being indifferent. The other is in this game, a means for us to feel whole. This doesn't mean love is false or despicable. On the contrary, its strength lies precisely in this capacity to deceive us, to make us believe there's something pure in what ultimately is one of the greatest movements of self-affirmation. Love is selfishness in its most poetic, most refined, most irresistible form. That's why it envelops and dominates us, because it offers the illusion of transcendence while serving the most basic of instincts. Nietzsche provokes us to admit this uncomfortable truth. When we say, "I love you," perhaps we're merely saying, "I don't want to lose myself, and it's in you that I find the reflection that sustains me." Love's mask is beautiful, but behind it pulses the raw desire for survival, dominion, and affirmation. To love is therefore to appropriate gently, to paint selfishness with the colors of tenderness, and call it virtue. From early on, we grow up nourished by stories that shape our vision of love. In fairy tales, the prince finds the princess, and both live happily ever after. In popular songs, love is described as absolute, eternal, unbreakable. In movies, the climax is always the kiss that seals an immaculate destiny. Thus, without realizing it, we learn to confuse love with purity, with an almost divine state, as if it were a force above us, having nothing to do with selfishness, instinct, or necessity. Nietzsche, however, tears this veil. Love isn't sacred, but human, all too human. It isn't transcendence, but a construction of illusions we carry because we need to believe in them. Romanticism is perhaps the most sophisticated form of self-deception. It creates a narrative where two souls complete each other as if they were halves predestined to meet. But what's most dangerous about this idea is precisely the promise of eternity. Who said love must last forever? Who convinced us that if it's not eternal, it's not true? Nietzsche saw in this an unbearable weight, an emotional prison built on fantasies. Romantic love doesn't accept impermanence. It demands fixation, demands stability, demands that the other remain the same so the illusion continues intact. In real life, however, everything changes. Desires change, bodies change, thoughts change. Human beings are flux, movement, and trying to freeze them in the form of eternal love is condemning oneself to frustration. That's why so many couples, upon perceiving that the initial flame has diminished, believe love has ended. In truth, what ended was the illusion of romantic purity, that initial sensation that the other was perfect, that the encounter would suffice to heal all lacks. Nietzsche, with his brutal clarity, reminds us that nothing heals us, that no one completes us, that love isn't a magical remedy for the pain of existing. When we believe in romantic love, we project an ideal onto the other. We see in them what we'd like to see in ourselves. The beloved becomes almost divine, a bearer of absolute virtues, an idealized mirror. But this projection exacts a price. The other cannot fail, cannot be too human, cannot disappoint. And when they inevitably fail, we feel not just the loss of the person, but the destruction of a belief. That's why romantic disillusion hurts so much. Not because we lost someone, but because we lost a lie that sustained our worldview. Nietzsche would ironize the way we cling to these illusions, how we insist on believing love is pure when everything about it screams contradiction. Love is desire, but also fear. It's affection, but also possession. It's tenderness, but also instinct. Reducing it to purity is mutilating it. True love, if it exists, isn't that which presents itself as a fairy tale, but that which bears the truth of imperfection. It's love that faces the other as a flawed, unstable, transitory being, and still chooses to remain, not because an eternal promise exists, but because in that instant life pulses more intensely together. By unmasking romantic purity, Nietzsche isn't denying love's beauty. He merely displaces it. Beauty doesn't lie in promised eternity, but in lived intensity. It doesn't lie in the illusion of perfection, but in the courage to love without illusions, to accept that the other doesn't complete us, merely accompanies us for a stretch of the path. The cruel truth is that love isn't a destiny written in the stars, but a fragile pact between two egoisms that, for some time, decide to walk side by side. If we have the courage to face this reality, perhaps we can love more freely. Love not because we believe in an ideal of purity, but because we recognize in love a human creation, a game of forces, a necessary invention to give some flavor to life. Love isn't divine, it's ours. And precisely because it's human, it carries the contradiction, fragility, and beauty of everything that constitutes us. Nietzsche didn't believe in love as an experience of equality or absolute surrender. For him, to love was, above all, to exercise power. The affection that seems like giving hides an impulse for domination, a will to assert oneself over the other, to mold them, to control them. Love, in his view, isn't the annulment of ego, but its intensification. We love not to lose ourselves, but to expand our frontiers, to transform the other into our own territory. Look at jealousy, for example. It's one of the clearest symptoms of this power instinct that permeates love. Jealousy doesn't arise because we merely want the other's well-being. It's born because we cannot bear the idea that our possession is threatened. The other isn't just a person, but an object of affirmation. They chose me, they prefer me, they desire me. When someone threatens this, we don't feel merely fear of losing companionship. We feel the wound to our pride, to our dominion over that territory we believed secure. To love, in this sense, is to claim sovereignty over the other's heart and body, like one who plants a flag on newly conquered land. Nietzsche saw in this game a direct expression of the will to power, a central concept in his thought. The will to power isn't merely desire to command or control crudely. It's the vital impulse that moves everything that exists, the force that seeks to grow, expand, assert itself before the world. In love, this impulse manifests sophisticatedly. We seek not merely to be with the other, but to make them ours, insert them into our narrative, adapt them to our universe of meaning. Behind the words, "I love you," hides the whisper, "I want you to be what confirms me, strengthens me, belongs to me." Think about how we mold the other in a relationship. Unconsciously, we try to adjust their habits, influence their choices, direct their gestures. We want them to dress a certain way, speak in a certain manner, think like us. Even care can be a form of control. When we say, "Do this, it's better for you," we often merely want the other to correspond to what we consider acceptable. It's as if love were a secret laboratory where we test our capacity to dominate gently. And this isn't limited to possessive or abusive relationships. Even in relationships we call healthy, this game of forces is present. The couple negotiating the course of their shared life is, in truth, disputing territories of power, where to live, how to spend money, which dreams to pursue. Each choice is a small battle where love appears as a mediator, but deep down is merely the stage where the eternal conflict of the will to power unfolds. Nietzsche didn't see this as a flaw of love, but as its essence. To love is to want the other to bend to our world, even if subtly. That's why great gestures of passion are always accompanied by a demand for exclusivity. When someone declares, "I only want you," what they're saying is, "I want you to be entirely mine." The idea of the other's freedom is unbearable because it threatens the dominion that love claims. This vision may seem cruel, but it brings disturbing lucidity. Think of couples who, after years together, no longer have great gestures of passion, but live under a routine of small mutual impositions. He complains about how she organizes the house. She criticizes how he spends time. Both believe they're caring for each other, but deep down, each comment is an attempt to impose their own way of existing. Love is the name we give to this unstable pact between two wills, to power that, instead of destroying each other, learn to negotiate. Nietzsche forces us to ask, is there love without domination? Or is the very desire to be loved already in itself a form of wanting power over the other? Because when we desire to be loved, we don't desire merely affection or attention, but we desire to be indispensable. We desire to be chosen over all others. We want to be absolute priority, the center of gravity of another's life. And what is this, if not a demand for power? Perhaps the greater cruelty lies in perceiving that love isn't an innocent feeling, but a battlefield where we fight for space, for influence, for affirmation. We call tenderness what is, often merely a more delicate strategy of dominion. The caress can be a way of saying, "You are mine." Care can be a manner of trapping the other in a net of dependence. Even sacrifice, so celebrated as proof of love, can hide the desire for power. Look how much I do for you. See how indispensable I am, how you owe me. Nietzsche doesn't invite us to deny love, but to see it without veils. By understanding that the power instinct is inseparable from it, we stop deceiving ourselves with promises of purity and begin to deal with love as it truly is, a game of forces. In this game, there are no definitive winners, only continuous movements of dominion and concession, affirmation and surrender. Love, far from being a space of harmony, is a vibrant field where our wills meet, clash, and reinvent themselves. And perhaps it's precisely this tension that makes it so fascinating. If love were merely surrender, perhaps it would quickly empty itself. But by carrying within itself the power instinct, it remains alive, pulsating, in constant transformation. To love is to enter this dangerous and inevitable game, where tenderness and domination walk hand in hand, where affection and power confuse themselves until becoming indistinguishable. Nietzsche was a master at tearing off our masks, at forcing us to face existence's harshest truths. But curiously, he also recognized something essential. Without certain illusions, we wouldn't bear living. Love, for him, was one of these vital lies. It's a deception, yes, but a necessary deception. It's not merely a childish fantasy we could simply abandon. It's a profound invention, capable of giving life an appearance of meaning, even when that meaning doesn't exist in itself. Human beings need to deceive themselves to not succumb to reality's weight. Life, seen nakedly, is full of pain, uncertainty, instability. Nothing is fixed, nothing is eternal. We're thrown into the world without guarantees, without a manual, without predefined purpose. How to survive this? By creating narratives that sustain us. Love emerges then as one of these saving myths. It gives us the sensation of permanence amid chaos, of belonging amid emptiness, of value amid insignificance. Even if it's illusion, it's an illusion that gives strength. Nietzsche said we need veils, masks, small lies to make existence bearable. The raw truth that we are passing, fragile beings, moved by impulses, is unbearable in its totality. Therefore we create love as a kind of magical potion that covers this pain. Loving makes us believe life matters because someone chose us, because we're irreplaceable in another person's eyes. It's consolation, but fundamental consolation. Without it, perhaps many wouldn't find reason to continue. See how this works in practice. When someone falls in love, the world seems to transform. Colors intensify, days become lighter, even pain seems to have meaning. The simple presence of the other seems to justify existence. It doesn't matter if this enchantment is temporary or if deep down it's merely a chemical game in the brain. What matters is the force it produces. In this state, life ceases to be merely survival and becomes aesthetic experience, almost like a work of art. Love creates a narrative of beauty that covers reality's brutality. Nietzsche didn't see this as weakness, but as life's cunning. Self-deception is a creative resource. We're not merely victims of illusions, we're also their authors, architects of meanings that protect us. Love is one of these ingenious inventions. It deludes us, but at the same time gives us potency, movement, courage. The error isn't in loving, but in believing love is the ultimate truth. The problem begins when we confuse the mask with the face, invention with essence. That's why Nietzsche criticized romanticism so harshly. He didn't condemn love itself, but the way we surrender to it as if it were definitive salvation. To love is to invent, but when we believe this invention is absolute, we become its slaves. Self-deception is necessary, but must be recognized as such. Only thus can we use illusion without being destroyed by it. Think about this. How many people remain in bad relationships because they believe love is eternal? How many accept suffering and even humiliation because they were taught to believe that true love endures everything? This is the destructive side of illusion when taken as truth. What was meant to be a light veil making life bearable transforms into a prison. Nietzsche calls us to the courage of removing this weight, of looking at love as what it truly is, a game of forces, a necessary invention, but not a universal law. When we accept this vision, love doesn't lose its beauty. On the contrary, it becomes even more fascinating because we know it's ephemeral, and even so we live it intensely. Like a theatrical play we know will end, but that touches us deeply while it lasts. Self-deception is the essence of the play, but knowledge that it's a play frees us from the illusion of eternity. Nietzsche saw in love one of the most brilliant forms of lie, and perhaps for that very reason, one of the most precious. He doesn't ask us to reject it, but to become conscious artists of this lie. Love, lived thus, is no longer a prison, but a spectacle we create and in which we participate, knowing it's art, not destiny. The cruel truth is that we need deception. But wisdom lies in not confusing necessity with truth. We can continue loving, we can continue deluding ourselves, but if we have consciousness of this, we won't be dragged by fantasy. We'll be creators of our own illusion, and this, for Nietzsche, is the step of freedom. Recognizing that life only sustains itself on masks, but still choosing which masks to wear. If until here we've seen love as illusion, mask and self-deception, we must take a step beyond. Nietzsche didn't limit himself to destroying comfortable beliefs. He also opened space for us to reinvent our values. In this sense, love can be seen not merely as lie, but as creation of meaning. Even being deception, it's fertile deception, capable of transforming existence into something more bearable and even more beautiful. Nietzsche saw life as essentially tragic, unstable, painful, marked by impermanence. If we wait for an ultimate truth that gives meaning to everything, we'll fall into emptiness. But if we accept that we are the ones who create meanings, we can transform even the absurd into something worth living. Love is one of the most intense forms of this invention. It creates narratives that didn't exist before, projects horizons that move us, gives us reasons to get out of bed and face the weight of days. Think of initial passion. It transforms a simple encounter into destiny, a glance into eternity, a memory into myth. Two individuals who could have followed parallel lives suddenly create a story that completely changes their courses. This narrative may be fragile, may last little, but during the time it exists, it's real in its intensity. Love, thus, isn't merely feeling, it's a creative force of worlds. Nietzsche didn't want us to abandon love for being self-deception. On the contrary, he invites us to live it as a work of art. To love isn't to discover a hidden truth in the soul's depths, but to invent a way to give meaning to life's chaos. It's aesthetic production, almost like composing music or painting a picture. Love doesn't reveal, it creates. It doesn't discover essences, but fabricates meanings. And this fabrication is precious, because without it, we'd lose ourselves in emptiness. But here's the crucial difference. Living love as creation is different from living it as prison. When we believe in romantic love, we become hostages to a promise of eternity that never fulfills itself. When we recognize love as invention, we can celebrate it without demanding it last forever, without demanding the other complete us, without demanding the world offer us guarantees. Love becomes then a free choice of creation, not an inevitable destiny. This requires courage. It's much easier to believe in fairy tales than to assume the weight of inventing one's own meaning. Romantic love gives us security. There's someone destined for me. There's a purity to be reached. There's a forever. Love as creation leaves us exposed. We know nothing guarantees permanence, that the other can change, that we ourselves change. But in this fragility also resides strength, because if there are no guarantees, there's freedom. We can create and recreate our bonds. We can live different loves throughout life, each one true while it lasts. Nietzsche would call this love as life affirmation. Even being illusion, it becomes a way of saying yes to existence, of embracing chaos and transforming it into beauty. Love, in this sense, isn't refuge against tragedy, but a mode of dancing with it. It's not anesthesia, it's aesthetic creation before the absurd. We can think of this concretely. A couple that, knowing of impermanence, decides to live intensely the present without promising eternity. They know it might not last, but they live each instant as if it were unique. They don't charge the other with the impossible promise of being forever, but celebrate the now as work in construction. This love is freer, more creative, because it doesn't rely on heavy illusions, but on conscious inventions. Nietzsche provokes us to abandon the idea that love needs to be pure to be true. Purity is a fiction that imprisons us. What makes love true is its creative intensity, its capacity to give color to emptiness. To love is to invent a way to make life more bearable, richer, more beautiful. And if this is lie, it's a lie that strengthens us, that gives us potency to bear existence's tragedy. The challenge, therefore, is to live love without falling into the despair of broken illusion. It's accepting that it's our construction, that it depends on our creative force, not on eternal promises. When we achieve this, love ceases to be a prison and becomes an art, the art of creating possible worlds from the encounter of two imperfect beings. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to love less, but to love in another way. Love as creation, not as salvation. Love as conscious invention, not as submission to a myth. Love without denying tragedy, but precisely because of it. Because it's in the midst of pain, impermanence, and uncertainty that love flourishes as one of our most beautiful lies, and perhaps the most necessary. After traversing the darkest layers of Nietzsche's vision of love, we arrive at a crucial point. How to live this feeling without falling into the traps of illusions. If love is disguised selfishness, power instinct, and self-deception, is there space left to experience it truthfully? Nietzsche believed so, but not in the way we were taught. Loving without illusions doesn't mean rejecting love, but liberating it from romanticism's chains and false promises. It's learning to love consciously, without asking the impossible from the other. To be eternal, to be perfect, to be the savior of our existence. The first step is recognizing life's tragic nature. Nothing lasts forever, neither us nor our bonds. all love is destined for transformation or end. But instead of seeing in this a reason to give up, Nietzsche invites us to affirm impermanence. To love, knowing it may end, is more courageous than loving believing in eternity. It's choosing to live intensely the present without anesthetizing the mind with future promises. Free love is that which doesn't need the illusion of permanence to have value. Imagine two lovers who know they don't complete each other, that they're not halves of an orange, that they weren't predestined for one another. Still, they decide to walk together for a time, creating meaning in the instant they live. This love doesn't rely on guarantees, but on choices renewed day after day. It's more fragile in appearance, but stronger in essence, because it doesn't sustain itself on fantasies. It sustains itself on the courage of being with the other, without illusions. Nietzsche warns us of dependence's danger. When we transform the other into our savior, we inevitably imprison ourselves. We ask them to heal our pains, to give meaning to our life, to fill our voids. But this is impossible. The other can accompany us, but cannot save us. To love without illusions is recognizing this difference, not demanding the other be the source of our completeness, but sharing with them the adventure of existing. This love is also a form of freedom. It doesn't imprison, doesn't suffocate, doesn't transform the relationship into a field of possession. It's clear the power instinct is still present. It never disappears, but it can be lived more consciously, less tyrannically. Instead of demanding total dominion, we learn to negotiate, to yield, to coexist with tension. To love without illusions is knowing the other has their own life, their own desires, their own trajectory, and still choosing to be beside them, not to control them, but to create something in common. Nietzsche believed human greatness lies in the capacity to create values. Love, lived consciously, can be one of these values. It's not a universal truth, but a creative choice. When we love thus, we stop repeating scripts imposed by romantic culture and begin to invent our own way of living love. Each relationship becomes a unique work, without ready formulas, without need to fit into models. It's an exercise of freedom and aesthetic creation. Loving without illusions also requires accepting the suffering that accompanies love. No bond exists without pain. Jealousies, insecurities, losses, all this is part of the loving experience. The difference lies in not transforming these pains into absolute tragedies. When we recognize that love is imperfect by nature, we don't despair before failures. On the contrary, we begin to see them as part of the process, as signs that we're alive, that we risk. Love isn't refuge against pain, but a mode of crossing it with more intensity. Liberation, then, doesn't lie in denying love, but in assuming its contradictory essence. It's accepting that it's selfish and generous at the same time, that it's power and fragility, that it's lie and creation. And even knowing this, choosing to love. This is the most courageous gesture, diving into illusion with full consciousness that it's illusion. Loving without deceiving oneself isn't coldness, but maturity. It's looking the other in the eyes and saying, I know you won't save me, but even so, I choose to be here. Nietzsche doesn't offer us a manual for loving, but a provocation. That we stop living love as a weight or an unreachable promise and transform it into a personal work of art. This means creating our own meanings, our own pacts, our own ways of living this feeling. Love without illusions isn't lesser, it's freer, stronger, truer. It doesn't promise eternity, but delivers intensity. It doesn't promise salvation, but offers companionship in existence's chaos. Perhaps true liberation is this, loving without expecting love to redeem us, loving because life in its hardness becomes more bearable when shared. Loving knowing its deception, but living this deception like one who creates beauty from nothing. Nietzsche calls us to this challenge. Stop being prisoners of romantic illusions and become artists of love, conscious creators of the most beautiful lie humanity has ever invented. We reach the end of this journey through Nietzsche's cruel and liberating gaze upon love. We've seen that behind purity's mask, love reveals its true face: selfishness, power instinct, self-deception. But we've also discovered that these illusions, far from being merely weaknesses, are necessary creations, capable of giving meaning to life, of transforming it into something bearable and even beautiful. Love isn't purity nor destiny, but human invention. A work of art we create to sustain ourselves before existence's chaos. Learning to love without illusions is perhaps one of the deepest lessons we can take from Nietzsche. This doesn't mean coldness or detachment, but courage. Courage to look at love in its fragility, accept its contradictions, and even so, choose to live it. Love without demanding eternity, without asking perfection, without transforming the other into savior. Love like one who creates, and not like one who surrenders to a ready myth. This is true liberation, transforming love into conscious choice, into aesthetic invention, into intensity lived in the instant. Now I ask you, what belief about love has most imprisoned you until today? Write here in the comments. I really want to know where you're watching from and how this reflection resonated with you. If this content moved you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share this journey with those who also need to look at love without illusions. Thank you so much for being here, being part of this philosophical community that seeks, with courage, to face life in all its depth.